So over to you, Tim.
Thanks for that, Will. Thanks everyone, and especially Manuel, of course, for coming on today. Manuel is the co-author of Topologies, so it's a pretty significant book, I think, that's been doing around since late last year and was recognised by Book Authority as 2020's third top management book globally, so we're pretty lucky to have him here tonight. So good on you, Manuel. So I first heard about his work on Arrested DevOps podcast, and you know, I could just instantly identify with the problem they were trying to solve. Why does Teams work sometimes and at times it doesn't? And I've thought about it many times, and probably all of my career really, ever since first starting. And especially these days, since the ebb and flow of the old Atlas versus open workspace versus collaboration and focus type debate that people have. And I consider myself pretty creative, but I never thought of this problem in this really useful way that Manuel's looked at it. So I reserve the word to preserve its sort of impact, but to me, the way Team Topologies, the angle they took on this, it just felt like genius to me. So good on you, Manuel, and yeah, really good book. So you'll hear about elements of that sort of book in the talk on cognitive load microservices tonight, but I'm sure he's not going to fit a whole book in 45 minutes. So I encourage you to get out and buy the book or listen to the podcast, or grab a seat at the training course Manuel's bringing to Australia soon. So I'll hand on to Manuel now. Please add any questions in the chat window during the talk, and we'll cover them off at the end. So, okay, over to you, Manuel.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to connect with the community in Australia. There's also another resource you can look at our website, teamtopologies.com.
Yeah.
So we have some key concepts, and we keep adding or regularly adding new industry examples. So feel free to look into that as well. Of course, if you want to buy the book, that's great, but you can get some information if you want to dig deeper before you buy the book. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'll share my screen now. I'm hearing some feedback. Okay, I think it's okay now. All right, so just set up my screen here so I can see people's faces. That's nice. So it doesn't feel so far away. So this talk is about cognitive load, which is one of the things we talk about quite a lot in the book. So I think as Tim was saying, for many people, the book helped provide a lexicon to talk about some certain types of problems and talk about team responsibilities, describing teams and interactions in a much more meaningful way. So when we can talk about the problems, then we're able to start figuring out what can help us solve those problems, right? So the title of this talk is a little bit cheeky, right? It's not about monoliths versus microservices. It's the fact that it shouldn't be our starting point for a lot of these discussions around team capacity, team cognitive load, and how can we help them be more efficient, be more performant. So besides the book, I have a background in computer science. I started in the industry about 20 years ago. I had different roles, from start as developer, build, release management, QA, team lead, etc. So in the last, since 2015, I mostly focus on continuous delivery and DevOps. I've been a consultant for several clients around the world. And then from the discussion together with my co-author, Matthew Skelton, of the work we were doing with these clients and kind of seeing the problems that they had, not with the tooling, not even sometimes with the practices, but the fact that teams were not interacting in the right way, or they didn't know when they should interact. And from those conversations, we started looking at kind of patterns that work and patterns that didn't work, and then looking at other examples from other organizations as well. So that effectively is how the book came about. Maybe some of you, because since this is DevOps meetup, maybe some people have heard of DevOps Topologies, which is a website, devopstopologies.com, which kind of a predecessor to the book, where we were looking specifically around different types of teams and how they were related to each other in a DevOps context, when we're trying to improve the way that we're doing our operations and deployment, monitoring, etc. The book is then kind of broader patterns for organizations, especially organizations focused on technology. So with that kind of introduction, then what I'm going to be talking about today, it's cognitive load, and then also what is this team first approach that we talk about in the book, and some case studies. When we hear about monoliths or microservices and kind of what is the right architecture, what are the trade-offs, it feels a little bit like Street Fighter, right? So some people are microservice is the way to go, and others are, no, we don't need microservices until we have a valid kind of use case for that. And so you have people like Tamer Saleh, for example, talking about, start with monolith and then you extract microservices once you know more about your business domain, you understand better what needs to be microservice or not. And you have other people like Stefan Tilkov that says, don't start with monoliths. If your target architecture is microservices, then just learn more about it as you do it. And you have even other people like Simon Brown saying, well, if you can't build a monolith with the right kind of modularity and dependencies, what makes you think microservices are the answer? So all of them are right from my point of view, and that leaves people thinking, like, what's going on? Where should I focus then? And perhaps the point is that this question is, we're asking this question too early. And so there are other aspects we should consider. Daniel North, who is an excellent speaker as well, is very funny. He, at one of his talks, he was talking about, well, we need software that fits in our heads, right? So that we can understand the software well enough that we can make the right decisions. So when we take this to the team level, we're talking about, we need to be responsible as a team for a piece of software or service or part of a product that fits in our heads as a team. It fits our capacity. If we don't, if we're overloaded because we've been asked to do, to take too much responsibility in terms of the size of the software we're responsible for, in particular, then some of the key metrics that people like Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble and Gene Kim have researched. So if you're familiar with the State of DevOps report, they've researched what kind of distinguishes high-performing teams. And so all of them do quite well on these 4 key metrics that you see here. Lead time, how frequently we can deploy, how long it takes to restore from problems with our services in production, and change fail percentage. If a team has too much cognitive load, the effect on these key metrics that are correlated to high performance is that they're all going to be going down, being negatively impacted. It's probably going to take us longer to be able to implement a change and deliver a change, which means we deploy less frequently, because it takes us longer to understand impact of a change throughout the whole software that we're responsible for. When we need to diagnose a problem and fix it in production, it's again probably going to take longer if we don't have a good enough understanding of how the system works. So all of this will be negatively affected if cognitive load is too high. Effectively, that kind of slows down our ability to respond to our customer needs, right? So software that is too big for our heads works against this kind of organizational agility that, I think almost every organization in the world is looking for, being more nimble, being able to respond faster to what our customers are asking or what the competition is doing. And so that this is all related in the end. If teams have too much cognitive load, then they are not able to provide value as quickly, and so we're not as agile as an organization as we would like. So there's an actual definition. So I think the term cognitive load kind of resonates with most people naturally, but there's a definition from a psychologist, John Seller. So he's saying it's the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. More interestingly is that you can actually separate different types of cognitive load. So there's intrinsic cognitive load, which is everything that takes up of our working memory when we're trying to do our everyday kind of tasks. So for example, if I'm a Java developer, then I need to know how to define a class in Java, right? If I don't, then that's taking up space in my working memory. I have to remember or look it up on Google or Stack Overflow, what have you. Another type of cognitive load is extraneous. So this is related to all the tasks that need to happen for our work to be delivered, but are not directly related to kind of the problem we're trying to solve. So if I need to remember how do I deploy the application or the service, or how do I run the tests, how do I access the test environment, all of these kind of in a way superfluous tasks in terms of what we're trying to deliver, if we need to remember and think about them, then it's also taking up part of our cognitive capacity. And finally, germane means everything that's related to the actual business domain, the problem that we're actually trying to solve, or the feature we're trying to deliver. So if we're working with banking applications, then we probably need to know how bank transfers work, how bank accounts work, and a lot more. So in general, you can kind of look at it as intrinsic, as kind of the skills we need, extraneous as the mechanics, what are the things that need to happen to deliver the work, and germane is everything focused on the business domain. So once we know this, then it also becomes clear what we need to do about reducing cognitive load. Where should we focus? So that's clearly in terms of the extraneous intrinsic load, so that we can have more space for germane, more space to understand better the business needs, understand better the problems that we're trying to solve for our customers or certain markets. If you want to know more in depth around this topic of team cognitive load, Joe Pierce has a lot of resources. There are talks and articles that they have done on this topic. So that's quite interesting. Kind of the key takeaway from this is that we need to limit the size of software services or products to the cognitive load that the team can handle. And even more broadly, we need to limit the responsibilities of teams to their cognitive capacity, so that we can have software or responsibilities that kind of fit in our head. And there are different considerations, not just the software architecture, but other considerations that benefit from taking the perspective of cognitive load, team cognitive load, as a key consideration for those decisions, including, should we hire experts for the team, or should we get people trained? How do we, allow teams to have more capabilities that they need, so they can have the skills they need and not have that become kind of a burden on them, and so on. We also talk about, so as you realize, and obviously people who've read the book know that we're focused very much on teams as the units of delivery, right? The team, not the individual, but the team as the unit that can actually deliver value and can make decisions that will benefit the organization. And so we are focusing on this kind of team first approach for delivery and running of digital products and services. So when we talk about team, we're specifically talking about, in general, 7 ± 2 people, so up to 9 people, because a group of individuals working together is not necessarily a team. So what makes a team is that you create the kind of trust connections that are required for the team to work well together. So maybe some of you probably are familiar with the Tuckman model of, there are different stages of creating a gel team. So teams need time, essentially. They need some stability and they need time to grow and together as a team and to create the bonds that are necessary for the team to be efficient. This is also kind of backed up by research from people like Robin Dunbar, who looked at kind of the what are the boundaries of trust across different groups of different sizes. So up to 15, he found, are the number of people that we can have deep trust, that we know them well enough that we can almost anticipate what they're going to say, or we know very well how they think, how they work, etc. We found that 15 is actually tends to already be quite large for software delivery teams. So in general, up to 9 is easier to maintain the trust and have the team gelled and work together quite well. So that's our definition of teams. And then we need those teams to be aligned to well-chosen streams of work and domain boundaries. Especially since we have this limit on the size of the team, we want them to be aligned and we want them to be as autonomous as possible. And I'll come back to that later, but they need to be aligned to the actual streams of work. So again, if we go back to the idea of microservices, and we say, well, if this is kind of the, simplistic, obviously, the kind of architecture we're trying to achieve with different microservices, A, B, C, D, that are quite independent, they have their own data store and so on, their own APIs and etc. Because we know this is going to help the business deliver changes more independently, or that's what we're trying to do, then we expect to organize our teams along those microservices as well. And that's all fine. But if we didn't actually identify the independent streams of work and business areas that make sense for our organization, we actually align microservices to perhaps a technical view of the system and not the business view of the system, then what's probably going to happen often is that, well, now I need this feature and I have to involve 2, 3, 4 multiple teams, each with their own microservices, yes, but to deliver the value, the customer value of the feature, we actually need to involve all these teams because we didn't actually think about what are the independent streams of work in our organization for our business. So this kind of defeats the type of autonomy that we want each of these teams to have, so they can be high performing as well, they can be delivering value as independently as possible. So the types of streams that we see in organizations, obviously different services that you're providing to customers. Sometimes you have larger products, so you might need to identify what are the sets of features that are strongly related and you tend to change together or to have dependencies between them. Other streams of work might be aligned to user personas, where different types of customers segments might expect very different experience from our product or service. So, for example, a quick example: if we provide an invoicing software, then perhaps for a freelance or a small company, the experience needs to be very different than for a large enterprise. So, these kind of things we need to understand what are the different streams. Sometimes it's also related to compliance and regulations. And even different markets or different geographies might have very different needs. So the service or the product functionality is very similar, but the way that it is consumed and the expectations in different markets can be very different. So it might make sense, even though we tend to see this as duplication, but actually makes sense to have this as different streams of work. With similar functionality but different teams working on it. So we need to understand these streams and try to align our teams to these streams of work so that we don't get to this type of situation where We might have a great architecture, great technology that we're using for microservices, but then when we actually need to deliver value, we want to do that quickly, we start to have all this coordination between multiple teams going on. Other aspects that are critical for this kind of modern software delivery include being very focused on developer experience. So in particular, when we start having platform teams or platforms that provide services for other teams in the organization, having a strong focus on the developer experience, how well the services in that platform, how easy they are to be consumed by our internal teams. Again, going back to cognitive load, if the platform is supposed to help, for example, by providing a service for automated deployments or to help with monitoring, but then the teams trying to use those services are struggling, they don't understand it, it doesn't meet their needs, or the documentation is very poor, or the API is hard to understand, or it doesn't makes it difficult to use, then this is all actually increasing cognitive load of those teams that we're supposed to help, right? So this is not kind of an extra to make it nice and easy to use. It's actually critical to keep cognitive load down as much as possible when using, in particular, platform services, but anytime that you have an internal service being consumed by another team. And also not just the developer experience, but the operator experience, right? So if we have people in this kind of operations role, then what is the experience for them? Because we often focus a lot on development, but we don't focus on what is the experience. Can we make it easier to monitor, to diagnose, to problems that might be happening with the services? In general, or actually not in general, in particular, we need to have a very strong kind of modern approach to platforms and thinking of platforms as products, because even though the customers of platform are our internal teams, if we don't think about them as customers that have the choice to use the platform or not, and they should have this choice, and this drives the platform teams or the teams working in the platform to focus on things like user satisfaction, adoption, how well is the platform service actually helping the teams go faster, rather than imposing a burden on them to understand the platform and use it. So these are some of the aspects we talk about in the book that are important to consider to help keep cognitive load under control and help accelerate those product teams, if you like. So besides that, what we also talk about, what are the fundamental topologies, where what we call stream-aligned teams is often what's called product teams or cross-functional teams. But because of that, the need to align with the different work streams that I talked about earlier, that's why we call them stream-aligned teams, where not every team owns a product. And so we use this terminology. And then the other fundamental topologies you see here, enabling teams, complicated subsystem, and platform teams exist. In fact, their goal is to reduce cognitive load on the stream-aligned teams or the product teams. So kind of to give you a very simple picture of how this might look like, when you have from left to right, the kind of the flow of change, the life cycle of delivery of our services and products. So in yellow, what you have are the streamlined teams, right? So we're hoping that they have as much end-to-end ownership of their services so they can go fast and deliver them value quickly. And then this here in kind of purple, this vertical means enabling teams, which are helping the streamlined teams acquire some skills or some capabilities. So this might be, for example, a team of experts on usability, on user experience, and they're helping streamlined teams understand what is usability, how do we make our service easier to consume, and what are the things we should be looking at. And so the enabling teams are kind of typically in a facilitating mode. They're helping Streamline teams gain the knowledge that they're probably lacking in some areas, because not, teams are not created with all the skills that they need. It's really always a mix. And so we're addressing gaps with the enabling teams, gaps in skills and capabilities and knowledge. Here at the bottom, you have this kind of teal color. Light blue is the platform team, or is the platform that inside you might have multiple platform teams. So they're providing those kind of, at least initially, those kind of low-level technical services around things like deployment pipelines, monitoring, logging, what have you. Anything that is useful for the Streamline teams to use in the platform, so that they don't have to worry about it. They become customers of the platform, rather than having to own that the tools and having to own everything around how to use and maintain these tools, etc. They just want to consume as a service, hopefully. And so, and finally here on the left, kind of the reddish rectangle here, or square here on the left, means complicated subsystem. There are some particular situations we don't recommend creating complicated subsystem teams unless you really identify the need, but there's some types of parts of a service, like things like face recognition or real-time financial trading algorithms, where it's very complicated. We need people with deep expertise to actually be able to develop this part of a service. So in some cases, we need those teams as well, but I would try to avoid them if you can, because of the risk that they become a dependency. If many teams depend on a complicated subsystem, that might become a bottleneck if many teams have requests. And then on top, or besides fundamental topologies, obviously it's critical to understand how they need to interact. And having more clarity on the types of interactions helps us detect issues when services are not ready as we expected, or we need more collaboration than what we have going on, or we need less collaboration perhaps. So there are three key interaction modes that we talk about. Collaboration, which obviously was one of the kind of premises of DevOps, to bring teams that were working in silos closer together, understand each other's problems and how to solve them in a constructive way. So we need collaboration on the, to happen when we need to discover solution to certain problems, perhaps that Streamline teams are facing, or we need to design an API, or whatever it is that we need two teams to be involved for a period of time to actually understand how should we solve this problem, how should this solution look like. But it should have an established kind of expected duration, so that we don't have the kind of open-ended collaboration where we don't have clarity on how long this is supposed to happen. And so we end up with actual dependencies between these two teams, because we always depend on some other team to collaborate to resolve some problem or find a solution. And then we have facilitating here on the around the enabling team, where it's essentially when one team is helping another team learn or gain some capability or gain some awareness, for example, around continuous integration or continuous delivery, for example. What are the good practices? What are the types of different activities we might have in pipelines and so on. So whatever the domain, it might be UX that I mentioned earlier, or it might be product management, or whatever it might be, the team needs help. So another team is facilitating that knowledge in a kind of mentoring role, if you like, or coaching. And finally, the third interaction mode is X as a service. So this obviously based on things like infrastructure as a service or software as a service, where one team provides a service for other teams to consume. And we expect that actually we don't have the need to actually for those teams to interact. If the usability is high, the developer experience in particular has been addressed and documentation is good enough, then we expect teams to be able to consume this service easily. If you think about AWS, for example, we use their services in this kind of interaction, right? You don't expect to have to talk to AWS engineers to actually understand how to use their services. Maybe if you're working at Netflix or something like that, you might have that possibility because you're a huge client, but in general, that's not the kind of interaction we expect. So we can apply this also internally, especially for platform services, but any other kind of service that is being provided to other teams. Essentially what we've been talking about in terms of topologies, interaction modes, and think about cognitive load, what we're trying to achieve, and this is kind of one of the overarching goals for team topologies for organizations to achieve faster flow of change, right? And of course, it's not just about delivering faster, but delivering safely and getting feedback from our running systems to improve them and to understand, what our customers, what we delivered, has it actually helped customers? What are they looking for? What are the features they're using? What are the problems they're having? So we can integrate that quickly in the next versions of our systems and services. So we're trying the fundamental topologies and the focus on also the helping streamline teams have end-to-end ownership is to avoid things like this, right? Where if in the life cycle, in the flow of delivery, we have handovers between teams where we say, well, we just do the development and now you do the infrastructure part of this feature or new service, etc. Then we have a handover, right? The work goes from one team to another, and then the more this happens in the life cycle, we have more those kind of the silos, especially if teams don't collaborate, that DevOps talked about. Then the more we have handovers, the more we're slowing down the flow of change, and this is quite impressive how organizations that have many handovers, typically the time that is actually spent executing the work and delivering the work is maybe 10% of the elapsed time. So all the rest is kind of wait times, handovers, and or going back and fixing problems that another team found in the work that the previous team did, and so on. So we want to essentially, because the handovers are almost kind of killing our flow, we want to reduce handovers. That's kind of the key. But we need to do that by having teams, where each service is fully owned by a team that has sufficient cognitive capacity to build and operate it. And so therefore the importance of thinking about cognitive load and capacity. And if we're going over what the team is able to do at this moment. So that means when we have kind of end-to-end ownership of, part of the, or end-to-end ownership of a service or a stream of work, that means the teams are not only developing and the code, but also, being able to release, deploy, test, operate this service and support it effectively. So all these dimensions need to be considered when we're thinking about cognitive load for a team. It's not just about implementing this feature and deploying and that's it. It's kind of the long-term viability of the service that the team is responsible for that we want to kind of preserve by maintaining the cognitive load acceptable for the team, and therefore the other topologies and the clarity on interaction modes to help us with that. Effectively, we are talking about product teams, or many people talk about product teams. We are calling them streamlined teams, but having this end-to-end ownership of the flow of the delivery and runtime of the services. So the last part I want to talk about is just give you some examples of having awareness of, how do we when do we need to evolve our teams and perhaps our software architectures as well to keep this kind of rapid flow of change. So Dr. Naomi Stanford, she's an expert in organization design. She has written several books. So she talks about, many things that organizations need to be responsive and, have that kind of business agility, if you like, to respond quickly to changes. And one of the things is environmental scanning. So that means we need not just obviously to be looking at the market, what's changing and customers, but also internally in our environment. How are things changing? What are some signs that perhaps we need to rethink our team structures? We need to rethink the way teams are working together or not working together. So one example, which is actually in the book as well, it's actually a large retailer around the world. And they were kind of your typical enterprise where things were quite slow. A lot of dependencies between functional teams. And so any project would not see a first delivery before, minimum 6 months, perhaps even 1 year. And they said, well, we want to address this new market we identified, which can be very profitable for the company, in one of the kind of emerging countries. And they said, well, we need to do something different. We cannot wait 6 months. So they said, wait, let's create a cross-functional team. They will have people who actually have the business knowledge inside the team. And also, from a technical point of view, the team can decide to use public cloud, to use any kind of tooling they need, automation, etc. So basically the team decided you have the autonomy to decide exactly how you want to work. So that we can make this happen, and they were quite successful. After I believe it was a couple of months or even less, they were able to deliver a first version to this new market. They were focusing especially on the mobile, the mobile experience for their customers, because in that particular market, most customers are mobile first, and so this team was quite successful. So, as normally happens, they were asked to do the same for another market or another country. And that was still okay. They grew the team a little bit. And, this kind of pattern went on for the next year. And you start to see the team growing and growing. They have more and more responsibilities, right? They have to cater to all these different markets that they created mobile apps and the mobile experience for. Their backend starts to get a little bit more complicated. It's still simplified here in this diagram, but things start to get a bit more complicated. The team starts to get a bit bigger, or much bigger. And at this point, you could just go on and let the team sort it out. But some of the people, especially the architects, that people who had more of an architect role in the team, started to see that actually we're slowing down a lot compared to the beginning of the team. And we see that there are inside the team kind of sub-teams, and there are dependencies between people inside the team, where now we have people being some people only know about part of the system, other people only know about other part of the system. And so effectively we have created sub-teams. And this is, different actual streams of work inside the system were, getting on top of each other and blocking the flow. So what they decided to do, and people in the team were not necessarily, they were not initially understanding why they were doing this, but they decided to split the team into two smaller teams. They did a bit of re-architecting their software so this could work. But effectively they said, well, we can have one smaller team that is actually looking at the mobile experience and the product and the customer experience. And we can have another team, another smaller team that is focusing more on the kind of backend systems or services that were used across multiple markets, right? So they were common to multiple of the markets. And this worked quite well for them. So it doesn't mean that we expect these two teams now to be totally independent, because they're not. There's still the same system overall, but we allow them to focus and to have each of the smaller teams have more autonomy and understanding of their stream of work. And here in the middle, you can see these two lines in the middle between teams trying to represent that still considerable collaboration going on. They're still going to need to work together, perhaps, 10% of the time or 20% of the time. There will be features and changes that require the two teams to collaborate for a period of time to understand how we're going to do this, what needs to change in some of the backend services and the front end to make this work. But perhaps the other 80% or 90% of the time, they can work on their own backlog and they can be more independent. So this worked quite well for them. What was happening before was they were, this division was almost there already, but they were trying to kind of work as a single team when the streams of work were very different by then. So kind of the signals that they were picking up was, or some people picked up, was that, they were kind of growing into more of a monolithic system as the team grew larger and the amount of responsibilities they had was growing kind of in an unbounded way. And so they were starting to see the flow of work being blocked across different streams. So these are kind of some heuristics, if you like, some triggers we can look at when to figure out if we need to rethink how we have set up our teams. Where software is growing too large, some people start to become specialists in the sense that only we rely on specific people to do parts of the work. So if you're familiar with the Phoenix Project book, that's kind of the Brent character. That is the only person who knows about a lot of different things that many teams need. But even inside a single team, that starts to become a bottleneck. And you start to have, even inside the team, more need for coordination. Try to do this one quickly since I've been going on for quite a long time already. So OutSystems is a company that provides no-code or low-code platform for organizations. Kind of the interesting thing is that they had a team that started as a kind of enabling team. They were trying to help the development teams understand more about continuous integration, helping them set up pipelines that were more efficient, more reliable, etc. And over time, again, because they were successful, they were asked to do more things, take on more domains of responsibility. So they were not actually doing a lot of code, but they were providing help with these domains, test automation, infrastructure automation, continuous delivery, etc. And so again, their team was growing as they were trying to cope with all these different areas of responsibility. And because they had been successful to a certain extent, they were just tasked to do more and more. And again, in this case, they decided to split into smaller teams and then align each of these teams to one of those domains of responsibility. And this kind of changed the way that people were working. The smaller teams were more flat, less hierarchy. They felt more autonomy and purpose. They felt like, okay, now we understand what are we trying to do. We feel like we have more autonomy to make the right decisions in this smaller domain of responsibility, rather than essentially trying to run after all the requests that were coming from all these different teams in different domains. So this worked quite well for them. Again, it doesn't mean that all these smaller teams are totally independent. They will need to interact for some types of requests or problems that they need to come together and understand how this affects the different domains. But in general, it worked quite well for them. And they saw the effect almost immediately of how they had more engagement in the teams. They had more people having more feeling of purpose, and also that they can now do much better on that smaller domain. So it's not always about just the size of software, but kind of broadly the size and number of domains of responsibility that need to fit the team capacity. In general, doesn't mean that we always should strive for smaller teams, but in general, we've seen multiple cases where having smaller teams helps with this high cohesion internally, where people feel like they have more autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so between different teams, we want to reduce the bandwidth, right? We don't expect them to be communicating and interacting all the time, but for specific needs where they need to get together and collaborate. So again, some simple heuristics. If people are not engaged, or if the interactions inside the team are awkward, because some people only know about part of the work, others about other parts, or if you have people who have context switching all the time. Now I'm doing work on one domain, and next I have to switch to a totally different domain. That's typically some signs that we probably need to rethink our structure. So quickly, since I covered quite a lot today, so where can you get started? So making cognitive load on teams explicit is one. So understanding how well does the team as a unit understands the systems that they own and they develop and operate as well. So there was actually a quite nice tweet a while ago from Rob Meany, where he was saying, you're essentially trying to find what is the experience of building, testing, operating, releasing your software as a team. And so if that experience is not good, if people are anxious, they don't feel like they have enough knowledge, understanding of the software, then we start getting some poor results in terms of quick delivery and good results and addressing customer needs. So we can start thinking about what are the things that would help the teams reduce cognitive load. Maybe are there some common services that we can push into a platform type of approach, where we say, well, you don't have to worry about this anymore. We provide you a platform service that helps you do the automated deployments, or helps you do the monitoring. And so you only have to consume them rather than have all the details around how this type of services work. What are the capabilities or skills that are missing in teams for them to be able to have a better handle? Perhaps they don't have experience with testing or test automation. Perhaps we need to help them with that, or some other domain. So once we identify what are the gaps they have, we can then look at the ways we can address that. Understanding what are some possible misaligned work streams by, realizing, if it frequently takes multiple teams to deploy a feature or change a user journey, then if that's happening on a regular basis, then probably we haven't really identified our work streams very well. And so we can start there. And this can be also in terms of regulations. If we are expecting development teams to know and comply with regulations, then perhaps we haven't identified it. That's also a stream of work that perhaps we need a team to be assigned to. So just to highlight, it's not just about kind of the direct business services, but actually all the other aspects we need to worry about might be different work streams. And finally, having more clarity on the team interactions. Do we know what other teams we need to interact with and why? What outcomes do we expect from this interaction? Can we make it clear what type of interaction we're having or we're expecting to have, so that both teams or the teams involved understand what we're trying to do and for how long? And then again, using any type of kind of awkwardness or problems in the interactions to actually understand, oh, okay, we expected to collaborate for 2 weeks, but it took 2 months. Why is that? Perhaps one of the teams doesn't have the knowledge that we expected them to have in this domain, whatever it might be, but it helps us kind of evolve, understand what do we need to address. So those are just some pointers, obviously, to get started. The book has been out for about a year. As Tim mentioned earlier, I will be doing training. It's 4 half days that is, in terms of time zone, targeted at Australia, New Zealand, and all the countries in kind of the APAC region. So that's going to be, I think, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. for me. So that's not very usual. So this is going to happen in 1 month from now. I created a discount code for this meetup, TT DevOps Perth 10. And there's still early bird tickets, which I have 20% off. So you can apply the discount and you get 30% off. And again, in these 4 sessions, we're going to cover in much more detail with exercises and more examples, not just what I covered today, but also other aspects like Conway's Law, designing architectures for fast flow, and how do these topologies evolve over time, typically. So if that sounds interesting, or if you have any questions, drop me a message on social media or email or whatever way is easier for you. There's also this slide with resources. So on teamtopologies.com, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are some resources to get started. We also continue to upload new industry examples as we talk to more organizations, and they allow us to publish the information. So, have companies like Uswitch has a very interesting case study around their platforms, and others. And there are a number of techniques and templates for things like Team API, Team Cognitive Load Assessment in github.com/teamtopologies. They're all Creative Commons, so you are free to use them as you will. You can sign up for news as well if you want to keep updated when new things are available. And that's it. I went a bit longer than I was expecting, but I hope it was useful, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks a lot, Manuel. That was fantastic. The long was fine. I'll make sure a lot of those details go up on the DevOps group as well, so people can get to them if they need it. And also slides. I don't know if you got the slide pack, or I'll even point off to the YouTube talk. Yeah,
I can send them to you. I usually also publish on SlideShare, and I send out a tweet about slides are available.
Okay. Cool. So I did find myself wanting to go back a couple of times, but I can't go back into all slides. So. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions. Manuel's work, if people know, it's based on a heap of coalface experience. So it'll be quite interesting to go through. I don't know if we're going to get, we've got a lot. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but maybe I'll skip mine and go to Lou's. So Lou's got an interesting one on balancing cognitive load with team members getting bored. Oh, by the way, people, if you know your questions coming, maybe unmute because you might be asked to contribute a bit. Would you encourage experimentation within the bounds of team scope, or rotation between teams to take that away?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
On balancing cognitive load with team members getting bored.
Okay. Yeah, so there is an aspect of, it's actually an article I can share as well. There's an aspect of understanding, people have different interests and different motivations, right? So there's an aspect of kind of aligning people's kind of personal purpose with the team purpose. So, for example, if you have someone who is really focused on technology and they want to, be always kind of learning about the latest technology, Kubernetes or what have you, to have that knowledge, then probably they might be a good fit for a type of platform team where they're more technology focused, but they also need to have the understanding of who are their customers. If you have people who actually really like to get feedback from the end customers, understand what are the features that work and don't work, they're more kind of focused on that side, then perhaps they're a good fit for streamlined teams, and so on. I think we need organizations to also understand that, what motivates individual people, what do they like to work, so we don't get people who are bored, right? I would expect streamlined teams not to be hard to get bored unless you really don't care about kind of the business you're working for. The domain, if that's not relevant to you, then you might have a problem. But streamlined teams are the ones that we're talking about in terms of having too much cognitive load. There's too much that they need to know about generally if we want them to be as autonomous as possible. And so I would expect streamlined teams to actually be, and people in those teams, they actually continuously have to grow their skills and learn new things as they kind of try to improve their end-to-end ownership. So I don't know if that answers the question. There's also a book that might be interesting in that aspect called Dynamic Reteaming from Heidi Helfland, where we actually referenced the book in Team Topologies, where she talks about more from kind of the social aspect of how do we change teams and how do we do that in a way that is safe, that we're not actually putting people in a situation where they are actually demotivated, because it can be helpful for some team members to change now and then. So having stable teams doesn't mean that it doesn't change composition at all. But if we don't create a team for 3 months for a project and then say, well, now we don't need this team anymore, everyone goes back to being kind of part of a pool of skills or resources, and now we create another team, that is the problem. It doesn't mean having a stable team with a clear kind of purpose and aligned to a stream of work doesn't mean that that team never changes, or the people in the team never changes. So it's actually good now and then to have someone come in that brings a new perspective.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I know which team Lou would probably want to be honest. Next one is Sham. So Sham says, who should decide which teams should form or exist? So who is the organizational architect?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that we see that some organizations are kind of struggling with that. But effectively, what you're saying is very true, and especially if we think about Conway's law. So the mirroring effect between organizational structures, the way teams are set up, and how they relate to each other, with kind of the impact that has on the actual systems and software architecture that we're able to create and deliver. Michael Nygaard, who wrote Release It book, has a really good quote. He says, when you're shipping a product, you're also shipping your organizational structure in a way, because the software architecture has been strongly influenced by the organizational structure. And so to come back to the question, we need people who have the kind of organizational structure responsibility, if you like. So often this is human resources or senior management, people who are deciding on teams and which teams exist and how they're related, and people who are looking at the system architecture, might be kind of your enterprise architect or senior architect, depending on the roles. These two groups need to have a common understanding that they need to make decisions about teams and structures together, right? So you need a kind of, or you need a new role, a kind of organizational coach or something like that, that has the view, both the technical and the team view, or you need to bring those people together to make the decision. So we can't have HR deciding kind of in isolation which teams should exist, or senior management deciding in isolation which teams should exist, because they're effectively accidentally having an impact on the software architecture that we're able to deliver. So yes, I think we need that kind of role, or at least awareness that we need people in these two kind of usually separate areas to come together to make those decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the other thought that comes to mind with this as well is how especially if you do have a role that decides how to organize the teams and the system architecture, it's the question of, as you know, your system architecture can evolve and change over time. So there's a bit of a balancing act as well there between having stable teams and then reforming and redeploying teams as your system or your situation evolves as well. And I think you refer to environmental scanning and so on as well. So I think there's an element there of, you know, listening for some of those trigger points to make some of those decisions to evolve the organization as well.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of organizational sensing is very important, and that's where perhaps people inside a team might not have that kind of sensing on what are the problems in terms of interactions, in terms of the team capabilities that are missing, and so having people in the organization who are looking more into this can be quite helpful. So yeah, and the other part is identifying the work stream. So you can use things like domain-driven design, for example, to effectively understand what are the different kind of streams and core domains, so that we can try to align teams with that. And that's going to help us then have more independent, hopefully more independent teams and more independent services that they provide. So yeah, I think it's all these things come together to support and to help us take advantage of Conway's law rather than fight Conway's law, right? So we can evolve the architecture and the team structures together and not have one that looks very different from the other.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm doing a bit of environmental scanning. I realise we're at 7:25 and only got 2 questions in out of a whole bunch of them. So where are we at? Manuel, can you give another 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, a couple of questions. And then if anyone has other questions that you don't get to answer, feel free to reach out. Again, social media or...
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more. Right, where are we at? David Meacock. How does cognitive load vary with the type of work fitting? So, for example, different considerations to take with work focused on discovery or exploration versus delivering a project out that's been already outlined. Yeah,
so effectively what we're talking about is we want to have those streamlined teams to be able to do both, right? So we're talking about streamlined teams having kind of product development skills as well. So they're not order takers, right? They're not just going, you know, this is a backlog, you know, someone prioritized for us and now we just execute. You can do that, but you have less autonomy in the teams. You have a slower kind of flow. So we expect streamlined teams to be able to do discovery part, you know, understanding what are the needs of customers, you know, are we reaching a fit with our service to what the customers need to do, but also having the operational skills as well to be able to run this service. Again, with the help from platform services, with the help from other enabling teams that are going to help us gain the knowledge that we need. But ideally, we would want streamlined teams to be cross-functional and be able to do both discovery, product discovery, and also running the service. And therefore, this cannot be a huge service, right? It needs to be something that is attainable by one team of 7 ± 2 people.
Cool. We've got one more then. I'll go on to, there's one here around techniques for drawing a line. So that's a pretty good one. Do you have any techniques for drawing a line between the ownership of the platform team and feature team? So for example, CI/CD, how do you work out who does what in that sort of space?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is that idea of we need to treat the platform as a product. So that means when we're creating some platform service, we're not doing that in isolation. We're not just going off and creating a service and then try to get the other teams to use it. No, we're starting from the needs of actual teams. So it might be just one team that has certain need that we're going to cover with the platform. So it's already starts there. We know we need that interaction. We need that collaboration with one or more streamlined teams or featured teams, if that's what you have, to understand, what do they need? How can we help them? So that's kind of starting point. And then the other aspect to consider is that the kind of the boundary between the platform and the teams is going to change over time. So effectively, think about CI/CD, for example. You might start, let's say you already have feature teams that are doing CI/CD on their own. They were, installing tools to do deployment pipelines by themselves. They are kind of have some knowledge around some practices around that. So they're doing it by themselves. Then perhaps what the platform needs to start with might be the infrastructure level. So making sure those pipelines are reliable, that things don't break as easily as they might be breaking right now. So that might be the starting point. And over time, that platform service around CI/CD might grow into kind of higher level abstractions, where you say, well, actually, now you don't need to worry about the tooling. You don't need to worry about, we're going to give you some useful templates for your deployment pipelines. What have you. It kind of grows the platform service into something that becomes more and more helpful for the teams to offload their cognitive load around CI/CD into this platform service that does what we need. So I understand that is a question. Like, we want to kind of, if we're creating platform services, then we expect teams to use it, but we still need to leave them with the option to not use the platform if they have a valid reason for that. And we need to engage with those teams to understand what is going to be helpful for you right now. Not everything that could be helpful, but what is kind of going to be the highest leverage for you today? Is it that, we can help you with infrastructure, or we help you with the tooling? So it starts with that kind of conversation. It doesn't start from saying what is the right CI/CD service. It starts with what helps the teams.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we're doing work, we're finding more and more drive your maturity from what the team needs rather than from a service that you push out to the teams, which is what a lot of people seem to want to do, especially vendors. Okay, thank you, Manuel. It's great. So everyone,
thank you, everyone.
Great for you to come along, and we'll have all that detail on the meetup. We'll get it up the next day or two. And thanks everyone coming along, and some of your great questions there. So very good. And don't forget to go along to Manuel's course in a month's time. Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Manuel.
everyone.
That was awesome.
Great questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Manuel.
Thanks a lot, Manuel.
Bye-bye.